Well, the conversation yesterday has been able to establish one thing. It goes beyond March 8 as International Women's Day. Here on the continent, women are beginning to be heard, and quite a lot, are changing in the way and manner we view our women folk. But it's still not enough, and that is why we extended the conversation to go beyond that one single day. Welcome to VSA. I'm Sulaiman. As generations grow and the years roll, the population of females on the continent is up. What naturally should be the precursor for growth has not been keyed into by many African countries who still count their women, sadly, as second-class citizens. Now, culture and traditions across the continent have continued to peg women behind, subjecting them to live with pain in unbalanced systems. While the girl child is denied education like some of her male peers, she further grows into a woman who's been taught only to play second fiddle when she could rule the world. The times are changing, yes, as observed yesterday on the square, and more conversations are about the gaping hole left by the inability and unwillingness of most African countries to bring their women on board. For example, Nigeria's gross domestic product could grow by 23%. That's about $229 billion by 2025. Now, if women are allowed to participate in the economy as much as men, that's when that figure will come. But education for the girl child is still far behind, with 31 million girls of primary school age not currently enrolled in schools. Financial inclusion is absent, and enough African women are not seen in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, because they don't have the opportunity. Now, like their peers in other sectors, most women scientists are restricted to the lower echelons in society. But we know they can do more, and if given a chance, they will even do better. Well, joining me today on the square, Ndoni Mcunu, founder of Black Women in Science from South Africa, and of course, Ndiilokelwa Nthengwe, HerVoiceFund ambassador and Southern African Development Community Youth Parliamentarian. Ladies, it's a pleasure to have you on VSA.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you.
Well, anyway, quickly here, Ndil, you are an activist against gender-based violence in your country. Tell us, if you will, about some of the things you've done, especially about femicide. That's a word, a scary one at that, and the wanton rape in Namibia, as well as the reaction of the government so far.
Definitely. I think my advocacy is coming from an intersectional background, right? Because as much as I also advocate for sexual and gender-based violence, there's also the intersectional violence of sexual and gender minorities. And then on top of that is, I've also been a staunch advocate for reproductive justice and bodily autonomy with respects to access to safe abortion care and the liberalization of the current abortion laws in the country. So it's very much intersectional in that sense. And it's been ongoing for almost 2 years now. And currently, it is mainly within SGBV that I'm most focused on, but very much intersectional.
And let me quickly welcome Ndoni. Ndoni, I don't know what happened for a bit. We lost connection to you there. Welcome to the square.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Sorry for the audio issues.
Well, that's fine. Okay. Anyway, let's start with you. Let's continue our conversation here. Ndoni, quickly here, we were having this conversation about femicide with Ndil. Tell us, there are lots of women in the sciences in Africa, and you can start to feel their passion even from their, pre-university days. What do these girls who have a burning desire for STEM need to do?
So I think they need to really understand the importance of their role within the sciences. And most importantly, what they can do is find out how best they can align themselves in certain fields of STEM. And I think for me, it's more than just aligning yourself, but also just understanding your full picture in STEM careers. So understanding where do I fit in the economics conversation, in the country conversation, leadership conversation. Where do I fit in as a woman scientist who's doing STEM?
Well, let me go to Ndil here. Listening to both of you now, let's now establish what and why we're here. And the conversation truly and honestly should go beyond an International Women's Day. It's a conversation that shouldn't be, placed or only on a month like we're discussing now. Tell us how it's been like, starting your advocacy as a very young girl. What led you into what you're doing at the moment?
It's very interesting. I came more into my advocacy just after high school or in the midst of high school. And that was after I read my first book, my first feminist book by a feminist author, Ramapele, which the title was A Passion for Freedom. And in the book, she really talks about her political career and also her political and professional career within a apartheid-stricken South Africa, for example. And through that, she also had to sort of, cross and jump over many hurdles. And she had to break many ceilings. And I was about, I would say 17, 18, because my feminism or the concept of feminism only came to me then. And after I read the book, that's when I really recognized also that race, culture, and just womanhood gender really plays a big role in how you exist in the world. And actually, because the narratives are that you already have a position in society. And through the book, I was able to claim a different narrative and perhaps even just reshape my own narratives. And that's through that time, through those later years of my high school, that I really began to be an activist and an advocate. And it was intersectional because that was when I was taking into account race and gender and class, knowing that South Africa and Namibia have similar histories with colonial regimes, etc. So that is from that angle, from that lens that I got into the space.
Anyway, we'll come back to you to see if you have some mentees and how you're coping with them, because we need pretty much more from the women folk on what form of advocacy you're into. Ndoni, tell us what it means to be a female researcher in Africa, especially on your level. What are the challenges you faced, especially from the men folks?
I think now the sector is really willing to take in and is encouraging female participation, especially in research. But I think the challenges that we have is actually now the actual industry, the science industry itself, the research industry itself, in that I always say that it doesn't necessarily work hard enough to identifying what are our needs and where do we want to go and where do we want to change the industry into fitting, the interests that Black female researchers have. And so I think the challenges that we have is transforming the industry. The challenges that we have is financial. The support that we're receiving as an industry needs to change, taking into consideration that as a Black female, you come from a different family dynamic and you come from different responsibilities, as well as your interests and your hustle, as we say today, changes and is different from maybe what a male researcher wanted 100 years ago. And so there's a challenge of how do we transform the industry and how do we transform it to suit us and to make sure that it's tailor-made for African researchers. And I think that's a conversation that's going to take a long time. So when you talk about advocacy, when you talk about incentives in research and academia, how do you incentivize this research academia industry to make sure that it has great impact. And so these are the kind of conversations that we are missing, and that needs to change.
I think things are looking up in the continent. Now we're getting to see more women like yourself, and women president. Even they've gone ahead. The continent has actually gone ahead even before the United States of America in terms of politics. But women are underrepresented in science in sub-Saharan Africa. In Nigeria, for instance, there are not many women given a chance to thrive in that area. So, Ndil, what is it like in your country when it comes to empowering women? Because that's the whole essence of today's conversation.
Yeah, I think I would take this question from the lens or from the background of bodily autonomy, right? And that is the most important aspect that would uphold the dignity and the health of adolescent girls, young women, and gender diverse persons. So from that lens, if it is about empowerment, you have to start there, right? Because we are talking about agency of these groups of people, of these women, etc. And if they do not have agency, if they cannot exist in their societies, in their communities freely, with more liberty, with more socioeconomic agency, then what you do is actually setting back a whole community of people. There's a quote that I always like to come back to that says, women without power are often most poorest, and that is true. And it's because they do not have the socio-political and economic agency, the bodily autonomy that is not integrated within policy reform, law reform, and other program implementations from CSOs, etc., that then they are disempowered. And so in any given setting, whether it is resource restricted, etc., bodily autonomy has to be at the core of empowerment. Otherwise, it just would not, you would not see the results.
Well, Ndoni, quickly here, the thing here from the conversation we had yesterday on VSA, we gathered that sometimes some of those who actually push the women down and back are also women.
Many women have also internalized and have been raised and have been in contact with these systems of power. And these systems of power are upheld by patriarchal and misogynist views and attitudes and stereotypes. And so when it's internalized, you would often find that even women, even children, any other diverse groups, they also uphold these systems. And you never know from what angle, because this system, patriarchy and misogyny, is meant to benefit a group of people. And once you assimilate, once you sort of repackage yourself to exist within this very oppressive and exclusionary system, then what you do is you perpetuate the system, but you also then perhaps hinder the progress that so many other groups and feminist groups that we know are trying to achieve. So definitely you would find that as well. It is not lost on anyone, as we know that these systems are rife and it's meant to uphold a system meant to benefit a group of people. Even these women that themselves perpetuate this culture later on should understand that it is only meant to benefit this history of culture and patriarchy that has been there before them and that continues to be perpetuated by them.
Well, Ndoni, I wanted to weigh in on this. How do you handle such cases when those who actually the stumbling block to the progress of your advocacy are also women?
Sure. I think there's definitely a conversation that's not had here in the sense of this pull her down syndrome. These women that are said to pull other women down, I think there is a conversation that needs to be had as to what are the struggles and what are the obstacles that they have had to overcome. And then how has that shaped the way in which they now communicate or the way in which they now interact with mentorship, with coming up, with supporting young women in coming up. And so I think we need to be a bit sensitive and be a bit sure of this pull her down syndrome. And rather than us jumping into, oh, women don't support women, and understand what are the struggles that this woman went through, what did it take for her to get here? And for her to get here, how does it change the way in which she engages now with people and with the upcoming generation? And I think the more we have a better understanding and come with more kindness, we'd actually find that we actually get along on so many levels, and that we have one voice, and that there's a need for us to just understand how we both communicate to each other. Obviously, there are cases where there are women that intentionally pull her down syndrome, but in that case where someone is pulling you down, I think it's important to understand how do you improve yourself with the right skills, in making sure that no matter what attack may come your way, she can't pin you down with the fact that you don't have the skills. So the best way to always overcome, whether it's male patriarchy, whether it's women, is always to upskill yourself and make sure that you're skilled correctly.
Ndoni, let me stay with you on this, because does it also look like some of the bad practices or tradition or culture that has also affected such women into now thinking that that's the way it should be?
There is obviously, if you've worked so hard every day, fighting, you're bound to gain a thick skin. You're bound to gain a more direct and a more strong approach. And so when a woman becomes more assertive about what they want, they then become, oh, she's bossy. And that's not the case. You're just more assertive. And so we need to understand that women are being shaped in a system that's not designed for them, meaning that you then change a little bit of yourself and in the way that you interact and how you actually, maneuver. And we need to understand this communication. We need to understand and break down these terms of bossy, of overpowering, of controlling, and categorizing women in such a horrible way when they're just being assertive and being sure about their wants. And we also need to understand that these kind of women in these leadership positions, in order for us to reach through them, we need to understand the ways and the obstacles that they've had to overcome.
Well, Ndale, I did say I was coming back to you, especially looking at those who are under your wings, beautiful girls across the continent. Tell us how it's been like working with these beautiful leaders. Do you get some kind of support from the parents? Now, we're talking about both parents in the case where we have both parents. Or is it a case of being accused that you're taking the girls, out of the path?
I think that's a very, very valid and very reflective question, because I wanted to add on to what Ndoni just mentioned right now, right? Because feminism has many different templates, and it's not a one-size-fits-all, right? And it's based also on your level of class, race, gender and advocacy and level of education. And then in that, we know that we are surrounded constantly by power dynamics and power systems. So when you go into a community and you try to express or to introduce new concepts, especially just the concept feminism, you are bound to sort of receive a lot of different kinds of backlash based on, again, coming back from that level of any kind of inception of education or concepts. And that's why language is so important. So what you do is, from this level, from your level of feminism or from your level of understanding on how communities should be empowered, etc., you go in that with the lens with empathy, right? As Ndoni again said, because you need to take into account that not everyone has the same tools and resources, and therefore you cannot then expect the same kind of adoption of your worldviews and your concepts and your activism and your fervor, for example. And so it all takes its own layered step-by-step basis, right? Step-by-step basis. And so you will find rejection in a few communities, you will find inception, you will find embracing, But at the same time, it's just understanding that you cannot, again, take your feminism or take your concepts and impose that on a community, because we are looking at, even to an extent, endangering a group of women, adolescent girls and gender diverse persons, just with a set of knowledge and concepts that you introduce to them. So what you want to make sure is you come in with a lens of empathy and you find a way to be creative and innovative enough that they also ingest and digest little by little what you introduce to them. And it may take a long time, and it does take a long time, as we know with the systems, again, the power systems that I just mentioned right now, is that they do not allow that level of agency. But when you do make that progress, it will actually be so much more rewarding, but then you understand, again, the consequences that surround this kind of approach.
Ndoni, for instance, Uganda and Tanzania, they practice what's called gender budgeting. And, well, this is believed to give the women, in such countries, some kind of unfair advantage. Take us through some of the processes that countries can put in place, especially in terms of legislation that can ensure that even when we're not having this conversation, it's a given that a girl child, the African woman, should have a pride of place in terms of opportunity and empowerment.
Sure. So just from the top of my head, one of the things that we could really do is ensuring that there are better incentives, and in terms of mentoring, in terms of advising young women. And so the mentorship leg and the mentorship program needs to be one of the things that we actually really, really focus on. And when I mean we focus on it, I mean we create real incentives where the system of mentorship for young girls is not starting at a level of postgraduate qualification, but it's starting at a primary level. And it's a generational program that has to be for over 15 years in shaping the way that they view themselves, in shaping the way that they view science, they view any other industry, but making sure that most importantly, they see themselves as valuable. So not just in the sciences, but building the confidence of young women needs to be incentivized from the government, from legislator, from private organizations, be it that these programs are saying, if you have and adopt a young girl child, you get, however money off your taxes or whatever the case may be. But it's part of the system. It's part of the contribution for private companies, for government, for NGOs, for everybody to get an incentive in mentoring young girls. And then after that, you'll actually be interested to see how many people actively want to mentor young girls and want to change the system.
Ndoni, tell us, does it also occur to you, or is it necessary that this, enlightenment should also involve young African boys so that they can start understanding, the import of what we're discussing? Otherwise, we just might be raising a replacement for men who don't think that women should be so empowered.
Yeah, definitely. The main conversation, I always say, I really can't say much because I'm not a man. And so I'm unable to say what exactly you guys need to do. But I really do feel that without a doubt, we need men to be a part of this. And so it's about curving this chat about gender equality and no longer making it about women on women and all of that, but making it an issue of Black poverty. We shape the way in which young men view gender equality, view mentorship of young women, in the sense of, when you start talking about poverty, when you start talking about education, literacy and illiteracy, all of these topics, everybody seems to, when you speak of COVID-19, everybody comes together in one room and says, how do we solve this? And so it's a matter of urgency. And as you asked before your previous question, it's a matter of making it an urgency within legislation, white papers, and making sure that through that, then young men are shown that this is part of the top 5 priorities in each country.
Let me bring in, Ndil here. I see you work with a lot of, African girls, young girls. I still want to hear from you if there is a window to actually bring in young African boys so that they can better understand this conversation and secure the future for the African, girl child and women.
Definitely. I think on that specific question, it's coming back to a reflection that I recently had. And that's really saying that gender equality is not a destination, but is a dispensation. And what we mean by dispensation is really designing new systems and new orders of doing things, attitudes, and integrating them into our everyday lives. So when we look at the adolescent girls across Africa, young women and gender diverse persons, we really need to make sure that within our projects, within our programs, as Ndoni said rightfully, is really upskilling, but really also with critical thinking and really coming back to just what I've really been contemplating and meditating over is power systems. And many, many resources, curriculums address power systems in the unconventional way as we have always been taught. Like, for example, the comprehensive sexuality education curriculums in school that informs adolescent girls and boys even of bodily autonomy, integrity, and just again coming back to power systems. And so with gender equality, you have to advocate for the dispensations to be dismantled by the knowledge that we now will be adopting, right? Because you want to dismantle power systems and power structures in order for you to replace them with new ones. Otherwise, what you do is you later on only perpetuate the same systems that we are currently addressing and confronting. So it's really coming in with that critical lens and again saying that every community will have its own template or perhaps even feminist theory and thought that it can digest for the time being until such a point that they can be as radical and as evolved and as accommodative of newer templates in order for them to realize and to liberalize themselves further.
Ndoni, we'll take a moment. When we come back, we'll be speaking, pretty much more on what the continent is doing. For instance, Mauritius is already leading Africa in giving equal opportunities to women. That's after now. Stay with us. The parents can understand the importance of the girl child, the women in our society. As earlier highlighted, Mauritius is leading the continent in giving equal opportunities to women. So in a ranking of nations, that country is found to have the highest index in Africa for providing equal opportunities in assets, entrepreneurship, workplaces, pay, marriage, as well as mobility. The second best African country in this regard is South Africa. Other than Mauritius' female presidency between 2015 and 2018, the country had a female vice president between 2010 and 2016. African countries definitely have a leaf to borrow from there, although it's not all plain sailing yet. There are pointers to growth. As there are positives to take from Mauritius and South Africa, women in Namibia are cringing under the weight of reckless rape and murder. In 2020, hundreds of young Namibian women took to the streets to express their displeasure against the gender-based violence, forcing their women to live in fear. Early unintended pregnancies affect 1/5 of Namibian teenage girls, and 40% of them are as a result of non-consensual sex. So Namibian women live in fear of toxic masculinity and are waiting for the government to help. This is in the face of low participation of women in politics. So the advancement of equality in Africa along all spheres will not only be the humane thing to do, it ticks financial boxes. If women are given the same opportunities as men, Africa's GDP will grow by at least 10% and will improve by $316 billion by the year 2025. So the benefits are enormous, but the desire so far across the continent has not been resounding. Now we continue our look. Ndoni and Ndil still with me here on Village Square Africa. Ladies, thanks for your time and thanks for unpacking this for us. It's our home stretch now. Let's keep talking about how this can, be taken home. The rural communities in Ndil have largely been left out of the growth equation in Africa, and it is a home of many talents. So what's your opinion on rural human capital development, especially as it concerns women?
Definitely. I was taking in what you were saying right now and just the different statistics. And I've really come to understand that, when we cite women empowerment, it's almost like we have to bring in economic benefits, and that is deeply rooted in capitalism. But at the same time, we understand that women also need to be empowered economically. Women and gender diverse persons need that economic access in order to have more agency, in order to dismantle the current systems and the pre-existing systems that continue to undermine their value and capability. So when we come to smaller communities, more rural and unsettled, underdeveloped communities, we need to also look at what exactly would be the socioeconomic agency, because of course we don't want them to model the same templates as cities and bigger towns, etc. But we do know that they need more agency within these communities, right? And that comes back to resources. And it's not necessarily about developing it the same way as we know cities and stuff can be developed, but really looking at other infrastructures. And even when we look at technology, right? How do we electrify? How do we bring electricity to a whole community that would also contribute to their agency, that would contribute later on to their economic development, etc., right? The level of technology, education, for example, right? Access to an education is an important part, and it remains important throughout every adolescent's life in order for them to sort of integrate themselves into society with the skills and knowledge that is needed. So when it comes to that reflection I was making is that we don't have to root everything in capitalism in order for us to understand the economic benefits of empowerment. Let's just empower. We don't have to get the same things. We just have to have opportunities to do things, right? And so that's something that I've just been reflecting on for a bit and just came at the top of my mind right now. But I would say that these communities should be empowered without that lens of capitalism, but just really that empowerment for empowerment's sake, and knowing that in future they can integrate themselves into an economy in order to thrive further.
And Ndoni, you want to contribute to that?
Sure. I think with rural development and, for women, it definitely boils down to capacity training and capacity building, as well as emotional support. And so I think if we want to implement projects in rural areas, especially with women development, as I say, we tend to take lightly mental health as well as emotional stability. And women in these areas have a lot to deal with, be it the level of poverty, be it the level of literacy, be it the burden of who you have to take along with you. And I think once we nail down mental health and stability, we then will get into what else do you want to do? But when someone is hungry, when someone doesn't have access to the things that you have financially, emotionally, how can you expect them to really think at their optimal best? And so before anything, I think let's support women emotionally. Issues like rape, issues like child abuse are still happening strong in rural communities. And I think we need to provide serious support and exit plans for these young women. And once we really understand that and the dynamics they have to work with in managing their emotions, then we can start putting in skills developments like your scientific training, communications, and really understanding them deeply as to where they want to go. And so it's a full tier thing. It's not just skills as an academic, but it's also skills in your managing your emotions and managing disappointments.
Well, you're the founder of Black Women in Science in South Africa. Tell us how this is going for you, because time was on the continent where we have less women in that field, but there seemed to be an upward increase, which is quite many thanks to people like yourself. How has it been so far, getting people to key into that particular field?
Sure. It's been quite interesting in the sense that it's been interesting to come in thinking this is what people want, or this is what the woman wants. And then when you actually start to engage with them, you realize this is what they've been crying for and this is what they need. And so for me, it's been an interesting journey in discovering what women need and how we are missing that communication. And so obviously, as you're saying, that there's been an incredible increase into the enrollment of Black females in the science industry, especially at undergraduate level. But the challenge that we have, and one that we're not looking into deeply, is the leaking pipeline, meaning that at a postgraduate level, from your undergrad, from your final year or your honors going to your PhD, that's where you see women not staying in the system. And this is why I'm saying that there's a conversation that we need to have in the sense of why are women leaving the system, especially Black females. If you look into the stats around Black academics at the University of Cape Town in South Africa, it's about 15%. And this is not even science or women. I'm sure there you're looking at your 1%. And so Black professorship, Black academia is important. And so it's interesting to see them come into the system, but then they leave in the system. And we need to understand why. And there needs to just be a conversation on how do we make sure that you stay, and how do we improve the science industry to suit your needs.
Well, Ndil, HerVoiceFund ambassador, that's you, and of course you're a youth parliamentarian, which is very good that you're on the show today. Tell us if there are moves to pass, for lobbying, other parliamentarians in your country to seeing that legislation helps drive your advocacy for women empowerment.
Definitely, I would come back to our country and our own legislation. And we have the youngest minister, the Deputy Minister, Emma Theophilus, who is the Deputy Minister of MICT. And currently what she's advocating for is tax exemption from sanitary products, right? So that is one of the most progressive ones that we've seen to date. The other is looking at the reproductive justice movement, of which I'm the co-founder for the Voices for Choices and Rights Coalition, that aims to reform abortion laws currently. And we have a petition that is within Parliament that still is awaiting that hearing in order to look at the way forward with sort of amending the specific petition in order for that to then become a bill, and then we take it from there. With the Shut It All Down, with the sexual and gender-based violence protests, we have the petition again in Parliament. It is being reviewed. We are awaiting our hearing in order for them to us also assess the way forward with that. So we have a lot of progressive policies or petitions and policies that we have within our petition that we want to integrate again further when it is adopted into society, that would make life much more progressive for adolescent girls, young women, and gender diverse persons. And coming back just to this one now on the tax exemption on sanitary products, is that beyond that, we want to see the country adopting a new approach to this, because yes, you can exempt tax, but we know that again, affordability and access lies within economic agency. So we need to manufacture them ourselves then, so that the prices are reduced. In fact, it must just be free. So that is at least the first step. But we know that there are some progressive kinds of policies and petitions that we are looking at. And hopefully it would be within our time in this year that we are going to enjoy that.
Well, then, Ndoni, let's look at our mothers, those ahead of us, those ahead of our children, those ahead of, the girl child. They paid the price. And that is why young women like yourselves are on a program like this. Time was when, they couldn't be heard. The pain, the trauma, the psychological devastation that they've been put by the activities of countries or men, are they also captured in your advocacy to saying that these ones who need rehabilitation also getting attention from countries around the continent?
I think definitely there's a need for rehabilitation there. Is there a huge focus on that? I don't believe that there is. And so when you look into the dropout rates around young women and you have an honest conversation around why they're dropping out at university or in matric or in lower grades like your high school level, it's usually these traumas. And so there definitely needs to be rehabilitation when it comes to that. And once we have these rehabilitation centers or support for these young women, we'll actually get to understand. It's almost like it's an unlocking of the mind and them seeing themselves as worthy to be here, as worthy to be in the system and strong enough to stay in the system. So there definitely needs to be rehabilitation, not just at a postgraduate level, but from a younger level in primary school.
Do you think, apart from culture, religion has anything to play, especially in putting the woman down?
I don't think so. If there are cases, I haven't heard of them. I think more than anything, it's really, it could be culture. I'm not too sure about religion, but it could be culture. So things like, your mom in your home in rural areas believing that you should be married by the age of 16. And if you're not married, there's nothing else left for you in this world, is a culture. So it is a culture of what women have been taught generationally from our grandmas to our great-grandmas to our mothers. It does play a role into what exposure that they have. And we can't blame them. We have to blame what they got exposed to, who was there to support them. And so it's fragmented from our great-grandmothers going straight through to our generation. So I would rather say it's a big cultural conversation around if you are a Zulu woman or if you are an African woman, this is the role that you're expected to play. And once we manage that dynamic, even in men, in how they expect you to behave as a woman, you'll see that we'll have less powerhouses, even in leadership positions.
Well, in listening to Ndoni, she just mentioned the Zulu woman, for instance. It looks like it cuts across the continent to the extent we've seen women and even mothers say, hey, you're a woman. Don't you know you're not supposed to do A, B, and C? And that set of some kind of negative thinking in the girl child, which ultimately affects her thinking, her interaction, in public and even in school. How best can this be unlocked for those that have been so programmed to think that being a girl child or a woman means to be so silent?
Very much so. I think I come back to just from your erstwhile sentiments around how our previous parents and mothers have paid the price, right? And I come back to really saying that the price is patriarchy and it's deeply entrenched. And so they're still paying the price because it's not a specific thing that now you've reached and everything else now, the oppression has ended. And that comes now back to how deeply entrenched and the conditioning is. So again, just tracking back again to saying that the templates are completely different, but one of the most important tools really is education. and it has really proven to liberate and empower a very, very, large number of communities, even within resource restricted, right? And that is the way that you then approach. And education does not have to be this very classist and elitist way of downloading knowledge. It can be through other templates, once again, in the community, in the attitudes and in the culture, again, that most people are immersed in and under. So you use that in order then to inform, because often people only respond to what they know. So you use that in order to then dismantle again these systems and these structures and the conditioning. And it takes much more also than just that education, because there is so many layers, there are so many layers, and it's so nuanced that even when you take in different templates and concepts, when you are 30 years old, you will find yourself still perpetuating a specific set of conditioning that you've learned and that you now need to also begin to unlearn, as it is a journey. So that's how you would really look into how to approach these kinds of things.
And talking about culture is one thing, and also helping to redirect the thinking is another. Don't you think looking at, chiefs within the continent, now I'm talking about rulers, traditional rulers within the continent, in as much as you don't get to see a lot of women as traditional heads in such communities, it will be so difficult to rejig, if not, erase the bad culture which is against women.
So I just wanted to get the question, sorry, because it broke a little bit. It was breaking down a bit.
Okay, I'm looking at the African continent, irrespective of countries. We don't get to see a lot of women as traditional rulers within, communities, which ultimately could make it impossible for, the cultural practices which are inimical to the growth of the African girl child to be so erased.
Definitely. So I think I look at it from two templates. There's the one template where we look at the ways that women and other gender diverse persons have internalized and assimilated into this patriarchal culture. And should they then come into these positions of power, for example, how different then would it then be? And then the second part is really looking at culture and how it informs behavior, but also most importantly, language, right? It's an important and powerful function that informs and transforms behavior and imports new concepts. So it's really looking at the ways that you can dismantle the languaging within culture in order for the systems that currently uphold it, the oppressive ones, to be dismantled through language. And that's the way that you can integrate in it. But then again, coming back to the notions of positions of power is, I think it's really something that must be assessed across the board, right? Because we have other traditions. For example, in Namibia, we have child marriages, for example. And some of it is within communities where we have kings that are ruling a specific settlement or monarchs, for example. And looking at really how to dismantle those ones and how to approach it again with language that would then inform the transformation of behavior and the concepts importation.
Let's close on this, ladies. Let me start with Ndoni. How positive are you, because this is a conversation that must never end, irrespective of whether it is match 8. How positive are you that what effort everyone, inclusive of men, are making to see that our women are empowered, sees the light of day?
I think I'm positive to the level of the work that is being done, at any level is really a level of appreciation. But I am a bit concerned when it comes to showcasing the women that are actually doing the work, media, in policy, conversation, having them present. I do feel that we need to have a better alignment. So instead of us talking about, what rights we need to fix, but have women and showcase women globally, especially in Africa, around what are they doing, and showcasing them on every media, on every platform, and having access to how we support these women that are playing a role in improving women equality. So I'm very happy about the work that's being done, but I do believe it needs to be improved.
And Ndile, how excited are you with the work you're doing in Namibia and other parts of Southern Africa?
I'm very excited, deeply moved actually because of the work that we've been doing, especially with the sexual and gender-based violence protests, is that we've seen thousands of young youth, adolescents come to the fore and really claim their voices. And for many years, they've been silenced, right? And it's been silenced by institutions that are gatekeepers, again, of this SGBV, institutions that, again, deeply perpetuate these power systems, power dynamics that, again, continue to thwart and silence young youth. So I'm excited because we are not silenced any longer. And I think it's the fact that technology and social media advocacy plays a pivotal role in dismantling and undoing the previous erstwhile stereotypes that led to the silencing. So I'm excited, and I'm really definitely looking forward to the activism at the fore, intersectional activism, and embracing really the many different templates of advocacy that comes.
Ndile and Ndoni, I tell you, many thanks for being such nice company. I'm all as well as excited as both of you. Time was as a show anchor getting female, subject experts to come on shows like this can take, the sweat out of you. But these days, it's pretty much easier getting females to talk about issues on the continent. Women make all the difference. That's just the truth. They make the world juicier, better, closer, and richer, as we've just discussed. It's unsafe to exclude women if Africa wants to progress greatly, no doubt. So they make the future, and they should be treated just as good as anyone else. Give a woman an opportunity. Many thanks for being nice company, ladies, again. See you tomorrow on VSA. The conversation on women on the continent continues right here. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.